The gown weighed more than I did, or close enough. Layers of hand-beaded silk that had been fitted to my body over 6 separate appointments I hadn't asked for and couldn't refuse. Each pin placed by a seamstress who avoided my eyes the entire time. I stood at the altar of a cathedral neither Marcus nor I had ever attended a service in, holding hands with a 70-year-old man whose grip was dry and cold, and entirely too confident. Marcus Delacroix smiled at me the way a man smiles at something he has already finished paying for. In the front pew, my Uncle Richard sat with his phone angled discreetly against his thigh, sweat darkening the collar of a suit that didn't fit him properly across the shoulders. He hadn't looked at me once since the processional began. He kept looking at the phone. 2 weeks ago, an underground gambling operation Richard had been feeding money into for 3 years had collapsed under its own weight, and the men who ran it had presented him with a number so large it had stopped being an abstraction and become, instead, a countdown. 50 billion dong. A debt owed to a cartel that did not extend payment plans. Richard had exactly 2 assets left worth anything to anyone. Me and Leo. He'd chosen to sell one to protect, if you could call it that, the other. I watched him check the phone again. His knuckles were white where they gripped it. He didn't know I was a senior analyst at one of the country's top cybersecurity firms. He didn't know that during the engagement dinner in Marcus's mansion 4 weeks ago, I had excused myself to the bathroom, walked instead into his private study, and slid a micro USB drive into the back of an unattended server tower for exactly 90 seconds. Enough time to copy 11 gigabytes of encrypted financial records I would spend the next 3 weeks decrypting in the dark, after Leo was asleep. My laptop screen dimmed to almost nothing so no light would show under my bedroom door. He didn't know that everything on that drive, every shell company, every laundering route, every dead wife's insurance payout rerouted through a Cayman Islands holding firm, was already sitting in the hands of an Interpol Financial Crimes Task Force, time-stamped, authenticated, waiting. And Richard certainly didn't know that the wire transfer he was currently refreshing his banking app to watch for, the 50 billion dong dowry that was supposed to clear his debt and disappear him from the cartel's ledger by sundown, was never going to reach his account. The priest was still speaking. I wasn't listening. Richard's phone buzzed in his hand. I watched his face from the altar over Marcus's shoulder do something I had waited 3 weeks to see. Relief, pure sweating relief. Then within 4 seconds, something else entirely. To explain how I ended up standing in that cathedral, you need to understand what happened in the 11 days before it. I was 26 years old and I had raised my brother Leo for the better part of 6 years. Ever since our parents died in a highway accident that our Uncle Richard had described, at the funeral, as a real inconvenience. A phrase I had never fully forgiven him for and never would. Richard became our legal guardian not because he wanted us but because the alternative, foster care, separation, a system that had no interest in keeping siblings together, was worse. And because our parents' modest estate came with him as executor, which meant Richard controlled access to money that was legally ours and functionally his. He drank, he gambled, quietly at first, and then with the specific, hollow-eyed compulsiveness of a man who has stopped believing anything else will save him. He treated Leo, who was 10, with the vague irritation of a man forced to share his living room with a stranger's dog. He treated me, 26 and self-sufficient, and paying most of the household bills myself out of a cybersecurity salary Richard had never once asked a single question about, as an ATM with a face. I kept my head down. I built a life around the parts of the house Richard didn't touch, Leo's bedroom where I read to him most nights, my own room where I worked, the kitchen where I made sure there was always food regardless of what Richard did with his own share of the grocery money. I told myself this was survivable, that Leo would turn 18 someday, that I would find a way to formalize guardianship and get him out from under Richard's control, that if I was patient and careful and kept earning enough to eventually buy our way to independence, we would be fine. I did not account for 50 billion dong. Richard came home 11 days before the wedding with an expression I had never seen on him before. Not his usual sullen resentment, but something closer to actual terror, the kind that strips a person down to whatever they are at the bottom with nothing left to perform. "Sit down," he said, "both of you." Leo, 10 years old, looked between us with the particular alertness children develop when they've learned to read a room for danger before they can read much else. He sat close to me on the couch. "Richard told us, not everything. I learned the full scope later, piecing it together from the files I would eventually steal, but enough. The debt. The men he owed it to. The kind of men who did not send lawyers when payments were missed. I have a way out," he said, "for all of us." "What way out?" I said. "Marcus Delacroix wants a wife." Richard couldn't meet my eyes when he said it, which told me, even before he finished the sentence, exactly how monstrous the rest of it was going to be. "He's willing to pay a dowry, 50 billion, enough to clear what I owe with room left over." The room went very quiet. "No," I said. "Maya." I said no, find another way. Richard's face changed. The fear didn't leave it. It just reorganized itself into something colder, something that had clearly been rehearsed on the drive home, a contingency for exactly this response. "There isn't another way," he said. "And if you say no again, I have a second option. The men I owe don't just take money." He glanced deliberately at Leo. "They take collateral. They've done it before, boys mostly. There's a market for it apparently overseas. I looked into it. I looked into all of it, Maya, because I needed to know what my options were, and I'm telling you, the wedding is the good option." I looked at my brother, 10 years old, sitting rigid beside me, not yet understanding the specifics, but understanding, with the terrible intuition children have, that something had just been said that could not be unsaid. "You're threatening to sell your own nephew to human traffickers," I said very quietly, "to save yourself from a gambling debt." "I'm giving you a choice that isn't between two good options," Richard said. "There isn't a good option. There's a survivable one and an unsurvivable one. You've always been the smart one, Maya. Pick the survivable one." I did the math in the seconds that followed, the way I'd been trained to do math my entire professional life, assessing threat surfaces, weighing exposure, calculating the fastest path to containment. Marcus Delacroix. Real estate tycoon publicly. I'd heard the name before, peripherally, in circles adjacent to my work. Rumors, nothing formalized, about where certain kinds of dirty money went to become clean. 2 previous wives, both dead within 5 years of marriage, both deaths ruled accidental by coroners whose independence I would later find reason to doubt. Richard was not just selling me to a stranger. He was selling me to a man who had very possibly killed the 2 women who came before me. I looked at Leo. He was watching my face, waiting to understand from my expression whether we were going to survive this. "Fine," I said. The word cost me something to say, and Richard, watching my face for signs of the fight he'd clearly braced for, seemed almost disappointed not to find one. He didn't know me well enough to recognize what he was actually looking at. He wasn't looking at surrender. He was looking at the exact moment I started building a plan. They locked Leo in his room that night, Richard's idea, framed as protection, though I understood it for what it actually was. Leverage, kept close and controllable, a guarantee against any last-minute change of heart on my part. I stood outside his door after Richard had gone to bed, my palm flat against the wood, and I didn't try the handle. I knew it was locked. I knew Richard had the only key. What I did instead was speak quietly through the gap at the bottom of the door, low enough that only Leo, lying on the other side, would hear it. "I need you to trust me," I said, "whatever happens over the next few weeks. Whatever it looks like, I need you to trust that I have a plan and that I am not going to let anything happen to you. Do you understand?" A long pause, then muffled small. "Are you going to marry him?" "For now," I said, "it won't be for long." "Are you scared?" I closed my eyes, pressed my forehead briefly against the door. "No," I lied. "I'm not scared. I need you to not be scared either. Can you do that for me?" Another pause, then, "Okay." I sat on the floor outside his door for a long time after that, in the dark, listening to the house settle around me. And I thought about 11 gigabytes of encrypted server data I hadn't seen yet, but already knew I was going to steal, and a task force contact I'd worked adjacent to twice on prior cases, and a wedding date already circled on a calendar in Richard's desperate, sweating handwriting. I had 3 weeks. It was going to be enough. It had to be. Marcus Delacroix's mansion sat behind 2 layers of security fencing, and a private road patrolled by men who wore suits, but moved like the kind of people whose actual job title had nothing to do with hospitality. I met him for the first time at the engagement dinner Richard arranged 8 days after the couch conversation, in a dining room with a ceiling high enough to swallow sound. And I understood within the first 10 minutes exactly what kind of man I had been sold to. He was polite in the specific, unhurried way of someone who had never once in his life needed to raise his voice to get what he wanted. He asked me questions about myself with a courtesy that felt, underneath, like inventory, cataloging, assessing, confirming that the asset matched the description. He touched my hand twice during dinner, briefly, proprietarily, the way you might touch something you already own to make sure it was still there. I smiled. I answered his questions. I let my hands tremble slightly when he touched them because I understood, watching him watch me, that a version of me too composed would interest him less than a version of me appropriately afraid. Fear, I realized quickly, was the currency Marcus wanted from me. So I paid it carefully, in exactly the denominations he expected. "You're quiet," he said, midway through the second course, his voice pitched low enough that only I would hear it. "I've never been to a house like this," I said, which was true, and let something in my voice catch slightly, which was performance. He seemed satisfied by that. Men like Marcus, I was learning, didn't actually want conversation. They wanted confirmation, proof, delivered on request, that the world was arranged the way they believed it to be arranged, with themselves at the center of it and everyone else in orbit. Around the third course, I excused myself to the bathroom. I did not go to the bathroom. I had studied the floor plan of Marcus's mansion for 6 days prior, pulled from county property records and 2 supplementary sources I'd accessed through channels I generally reserved for work I wasn't legally required to disclose. I knew the study was 2 doors past the east hallway bathroom, behind a door that looked, from the outside, like a linen closet. A detail that told me more about Marcus's paranoia than any dossier could have. The door was unlocked. Men that confident in their own security rarely lock the room where the security actually lives. The server tower sat in the corner, humming, a small green light indicating an active connection I had 11 days to study the architecture of. Thanks to a network scan I'd run remotely from the street outside his security perimeter during a supposed wedding dress fitting the week before. I knelt beside it, pulled the micro USB from where I'd hidden it in the boning of my dress's bodice, and inserted it into the rear port. The transfer began immediately. A silent progress bar, no sound, no light beyond the drive's own faint pulse. 90 seconds. I counted them in my head, steady, the way I'd trained myself to count during 100 prior penetration tests on systems that mattered far less than this one. At 62 seconds, I heard footsteps in the hallway. I did not panic. Panic was a luxury for people who hadn't spent 6 years building the specific, cultivated calm required to raise a child alone while an alcoholic gambled away everything around him. I straightened, moved away from the server, and was examining a bookshelf with polite, vacant interest by the time the door opened. One of Marcus's security men. He looked at me with mild suspicion. "Wrong door," I said, letting my voice wobble, pressing one hand lightly to my stomach. I think the champagne didn't agree with me. I was looking for somewhere quiet. He studied me for a beat longer than I liked. Then he stepped aside. "Bathroom's back the way you came," he said. "This is a private room." "I'm so sorry." I moved past him unhurried, though my pulse was doing something my face was not permitted to show. "I'll find my way back." I did not look back at the server tower. I didn't need to. The drive had finished its transfer at 71 seconds, 11 gigabytes safely copied, and I'd pulled it free and returned it to the boning of my dress in the same motion that lifted me off my knees. I found my way back to dinner. I ate the 4th course. I let Marcus touch my hand once more, and I let my eyes go soft and frightened when he did. And I thought, behind that carefully constructed fear, about everything I was going to do to him once I finished reading what was on that drive. I decrypted the files over the following 11 nights, after Leo was asleep and Richard had drunk himself into whatever silence passed for his conscience. It took 4 nights to break the encryption layer. Marcus's security team was competent, better than I'd expected from a man who left his study unlocked, but not so far beyond my skill level that persistence and the right toolkit couldn't eventually crack it open. What I found, once I did, went considerably further than I'd anticipated. Marcus Delacroix was not simply a wealthy man with dirty money. He was infrastructure, a central laundering conduit for 3 separate criminal syndicates, moving currency through a lattice of shell companies, offshore accounts, and real estate transactions so elaborate that untangling it would have taken a task force months without the map I now held. Buried in the financial records, I found insurance payouts from both of his previous wives' deaths, each one rooted within days of clearing, into accounts that had no legitimate business receiving them. He hadn't just possibly killed them, the money trail all but confirmed it. I sat with that for a long time in the dark, my laptop screen dimmed to almost nothing. And I thought about Leo asleep down the hall, and about the wedding date circled on Richard's calendar, and about exactly how much time I had left before I would be legally married to a man who profited from murder as a line item. I made contact with the task force on the 9th night, an encrypted channel I'd used exactly once before, 2 years earlier, on a case involving a data breach that had ended with 3 arrests, and a commendation I'd never mentioned to Richard because he'd never once asked what I did for a living. The agent who responded, a woman named Odile Fontaine, read my initial data package in silence for 11 minutes before responding. "This is one of the largest laundering networks we've tracked in a decade, asterisk," she wrote. "We need everything you have, and we need to talk about timing." I told her about the wedding, about the 50 billion dong transfer scheduled to clear on the day itself, the final piece of Marcus's purchase, moving from his accounts to Richard's the moment the ceremony concluded. I told her I wanted the raid timed to that transfer, not before, because I wanted every piece of evidence. The marriage contract, the wire transfer, the assembled cast of Marcus's criminal associates who would inevitably attend a wedding this significant, captured in a single, undeniable moment. I also need something else, I told her, a backdoor into the transaction itself. I want to redirect the funds before they land anywhere Marcus or my uncle can touch them. There was a pause on the encrypted channel. "That's a significant technical ask," Odile wrote eventually. "But given what you've handed us, I think we can make it happen. Send me the banking architecture. We'll build the intercept together." We spent the final 2 weeks before the wedding constructing it. A redirect protocol keyed to Marcus's specific transaction signature, designed to intercept the wire mid-authentication and reroute it, permanently and untraceably, into a decentralized charity fund that no cartel, no billionaire, and no desperate gambling uncle would ever be able to claw back. I tested the trigger through a smartwatch app disguised as a health monitor, synced quietly to Marcus's financial network through credentials I'd lifted from the stolen server data, ready to fire the instant the ceremony's final transaction authenticated. Richard, throughout all of this, saw only what he wanted to see, a niece who had gone quiet, compliant, appropriately broken by circumstances outside her control. He mentioned twice how relieved he was that I'd come around. He didn't ask what I did during the long hours I spent locked in my room each night. He never once asked what I actually did for a living. That, in the end, was going to be the most expensive mistake of his life. The morning of the wedding, I stood in front of my bedroom mirror while a stylist I hadn't chosen pinned the final layer of veil into my hair, and I looked at the smartwatch on my wrist. Plain, unremarkable, exactly the kind of accessory no one would think twice about on a bride, already weighed down with borrowed jewelry Marcus had sent over the week before. Leo hugged me before I left. Richard had allowed it, magnanimous now that the money was as good as in his account, standing in the doorway with an expression of relief so total it had almost softened his face into something resembling warmth. "You look beautiful," Leo said, small and solemn, not fully understanding what he was watching but understanding, in the way children always eventually understand, that today mattered more than most days did. "I need you to stay close to Aunt Ruth today," I told him, a family friend I'd arranged quietly over the past week to keep him within reach but out of Richard's direct control during the ceremony. "No matter what happens, stay with her." "Okay." "Okay," he studied my face. "Is today the day, the plan?" I kissed his forehead and didn't answer directly, because Richard was still in the doorway, watching. "I love you," I said instead. "Whatever happens today, remember that." The car ride to the cathedral took 40 minutes. I spent it with my hands folded in my lap, my thumb resting, very lightly, against the smartwatch's edge. running through Odell's final instructions one more time in the silence behind my carefully composed face. The transaction would authenticate the moment the officiant pronounced us married. Marcus's people had structured it that way deliberately, tying the dowry's release to the legal completion of the marriage. A final assurance that Richard would receive nothing until the transaction of me was fully, irreversibly complete. I would have perhaps 4 seconds between the pronouncement and the wire's authentication. 4 seconds to trigger the intercept. I walked up the aisle on the arm of a groomsman I'd never met, past Marcus's assembled criminal associates in their expensive suits, past Richard sweating in the front pew with his phone angled against his thigh. And I took Marcus's dry, cold, entirely too confident hands in mine, and I looked at him with the soft, frightened eyes he had spent 2 months believing were real. The priest began to speak. I let my thumb find the smartwatch's edge, and I waited. "I now pronounce you husband and wife." The words landed and the world seemed to hold still around them, the way it does in the half-second before something irreversible becomes real. Marcus's grip on my hands tightened, satisfied, already moving toward the part of the ceremony where he would lift my veil and claim, in front of witnesses, the thing he believed he had purchased. I felt the transaction authenticate through the watch against my wrist. A small, precise vibration, the signal Odell and I had built together over 2 exhausting weeks, keyed to Marcus's transaction signature the moment it cleared his private banking network. I pressed my thumb down. The intercept fired exactly as we designed it. 50 billion dong, mid-transfer, mid-authentication, rerouted in the space of milliseconds away from Richard's waiting account and into a decentralized charity fund with no ownership trail Marcus's lawyers, Richard's cartel, or Interpol itself would ever be able to fully unwind. Across the aisle, I watched Richard's phone buzz in his hand. I watched relief flood his sweating face. Pure, total, the specific relief of a man who believes, for exactly 3 seconds, that his debts are gone and his life is saved. Then I watched it collapse. His thumb moved across the screen. His eyebrows drew together. He tapped again, harder, the particular frantic motion of a man refreshing an app that refuses to give him the answer he needs. The color drained out of his face in a way I had never seen before. Not even the night he told us about the 50 billion, not even when he threatened to sell his own nephew to save himself. He looked up, not at me, at the cathedral doors. The stained glass shattered a half-second later. Not opened, shattered, colored fragments raining down across the marble aisle in a burst of noise that finally broke whatever spell had kept the congregation still. A dozen tactical officers moved through the wreckage of the doorway with the flat, coordinated efficiency of a raid that had been planned to the second. Interpol windbreakers over body armor, weapons up, voices sharp and overlapping in 3 languages. MARCUS DELACROIX. Get on the ground, hands where we can see them. The congregation dissolved into chaos, Marcus's guests scattering toward exits that officers were already moving to seal. Expensive suits and jewelry catching the light as people who had built entire careers on staying invisible suddenly found themselves recorded, cornered, named. Marcus himself turned toward me first, something in his face shifting from confusion to a dawning, furious comprehension. The exact moment he understood that the frightened girl he'd spent 2 months believing in had never existed at all. "You!" 2 officers hit him before he finished the word, taking him to the marble floor with the specific lack of gentleness reserved for men whose file included 2 dead wives and a decade of laundered blood money. I stepped back out of the wreckage of his grip and lifted my veil away from my face with both hands, unhurried, the way you might remove something that had simply stopped being necessary. Richard was screaming something at the officers, at me, at no one, his voice pitched high and cracking, the sound of a man watching every version of his survival collapse simultaneously. I didn't listen to the words. I had stopped needing to listen to Richard's words the night he threatened to sell my brother to a trafficking ring, and nothing he said in that cathedral was going to earn back my attention now. I found Aunt Ruth in the chaos near the side entrance, Leo's small hand already gripped tight in hers, his eyes wide but steady, watching me cross the aisle in a wedding dress with shattered glass crunching under my shoes. "It's time to go," I told him, crouching to his height despite the dress, despite everything. "Just like I told you, stay close." He nodded and didn't cry, and I felt something in my chest that had been coiled tight for 3 weeks finally, carefully, begin to loosen. We left through a side door Odell had cleared for us in advance, part of an extraction plan built alongside the intercept protocol during those 2 frantic weeks, a plan that accounted for exactly this. Maya and Leo disappearing from the wreckage before the media arrived, before Richard could reach for either of us as a shield, before the cartel's people, watching from wherever they'd stationed themselves outside, could fully process what they were seeing. Behind us through the shattered doorway, I caught one final glimpse of Richard, on his knees now, not from an officer's hand but from his own collapse, phone still clutched uselessly in his fist, screaming a name that might have been mine or might have been Marcus's or might have simply been the sound of a man understanding in real time that the cartel he owed 50 billion dong to had just watched, via whatever informant they kept in that cathedral, their payment vanish into an account they would never recover. He had tried to sell his niece and his nephew to save himself. He was about to learn exactly what men like that did to people who failed to pay. I did not feel sorry for him. I want to be honest about that. I had spent 3 weeks building calm out of terror, competence out of helplessness, and I had used every hour of it to save my brother and destroy the people who had tried to use him as collateral. I had nothing left over for Richard's ending, and I didn't go looking for any. Aunt Ruth drove us to a private airfield 40 minutes outside the city, where a charter Odell had arranged as part of our extraction. Paperwork clean, passports real, my new legal status as a material witness in an international laundering case, granting me protections Richard could never have anticipated, waited on the tarmac with its engine already running. Leo fell asleep against my shoulder somewhere over open water, still in the small suit Richard had insisted he wear to the wedding, his hand loosely curled in the fabric of a wedding dress I intended to burn the moment we landed. I looked out the window at the dark ocean below and thought about 11 gigabytes of stolen data, and 90 seconds kneeling beside a server tower with my pulse hammering under a composed face, and 4 seconds between a pronouncement and a wire transfer that had changed the entire shape of both our lives. I thought about the plan I'd promised Leo through a locked door, in the dark, 3 weeks earlier. It had been enough. We landed somewhere new, under names that were legally, permanently ours. And I carried my sleeping brother off the plane into a life neither Marcus nor Richard nor the cartel that was, even now, closing in on a man who had run out of anything left to sell, would ever be able to touch again.